My name's Larry Gorenflo. I'm a professor of landscape architecture, which is my main department, my 10-year home, as they would say in administrative circles. I also have courtesy appointments in geography, since I am a geographer by training, and in African studies because I do a lot of work in Africa. I teach often the graduate core, the 501, 502 classes. And I teach some independent studies to graduate students. And I also teach the 414 Depth Studios, which occasionally, though not always, involve graduate students. I have one this semester and had two last year in the one that I taught. I think of the classes that I teach, I probably like the design classes to teach to graduate students the most, in part because you get some sort of substantial or substantive product out of it, and hopefully you can push people's design abilities a little bit further along in the process of working on a specific problem with some real data. I think the most important is a strong work ethic. I remember when I was a graduate student and I transitioned to the work world after that. And a friend of mine who I had been a graduate student with was working for the same company, and he was commenting that people were only working around 50 or 60 hours a week, and it was really a nice change from the longer hours we used to work in graduate school. And so I think that working hard is the most important part, being sort of committed to getting stuff done and getting it done in a timely manner and getting it done well. And the other thing is, I guess I would say, is to be smart. But the fact is that in my experience, most people aren't particularly sort of brilliant in a noteworthy sort of way. I mean, some people tend to pick things up a little bit more quickly than others, but I think it really comes down to your desire to get the work done and to know the stuff. If you've got the work ethic, then the other stuff will follow through. Increasingly, my work over the past 20 years has been focused on biodiversity conservation. And in that case, there's about 220,000 people, more or less, added to the global population every day. So it's about 10,000 people an hour, which is really sort of mind-numbing. That accounts for people that are dying and everything else. So that's a net growth every day. And the human footprint of that and of increased per capita demand for resources is absolutely enormous. So whereas when I was a kid and there weren't that many people around, you could have biodiversity without necessarily planning every last thing about it. You can't do that anymore because there's too many people in too many places. There's 7.4 or 5 billion people on the planet now. So that's what I look at, and I look at sort of designed or the basis for designed environments with the goal of trying to achieve or maintain biological diversity or conserve biological diversity. And increasingly in the past few years, I've looked at the possibility of involving indigenous people or speakers of indigenous languages in that task. And part of that comes from a paper that I published with a few other folks back in 2012 that showed that the nearly 2/3 of or nearly 3/4 of the world's languages, indigenous languages, are spoken on about 1/4 of the Earth's terrestrial surface. So there's a constant, and that 1/4 of the Earth's terrestrial surface is where a lot of the biodiversity occurs. So the cultural diversity and the biological diversity really strongly co-occur, and they strongly co-occur in particular areas. So for me, at least, it's an opportunity not only to maintain biological diversity, but hopefully also to integrate the conservation of indigenous culture and indigenous languages, which are disappearing very rapidly. Teaching, I guess, involves that sort of interface between people and nature, which I guess is sort of the inherent to landscape architecture. I guess I try to encourage students to measure it a bit more, and also to come up with solutions that not only will work in the long term, but also that will address, in many cases, the disenfranchised. Well, there's a couple. So I've got a long-term project that's been going on for about 10 years in Tanzania, and we got funding to um, to develop a study abroad program. But I wasn't interested in just teaching more classes. I was really interested in maybe having a research project that actually involved students, be they graduate or undergraduate students. So we've done that. It's in rural Tanzania, in a really great area, and we work with really great partners there. There's always work that could be done there. We've got a lot of data now that I'm beginning to analyze and write up after all these years, because we've done studies in 9 different communities, and it's taken a while to get all those data pulled together, but we finally got all of them assembled. We're probably going to try to develop plans for those communities. And part of those plans would involve the use of virtual reality to sort of portray um, new landscape ideas or whatever to community members who aren't really used to looking at analytical maps. So most people have had 7th grade educations and no more, and they don't really, apart from maybe looking at a bit of Google Maps, because a lot of people have smartphones now, they don't really have any heritage of doing this stuff. And so being able to sort of integrate virtual reality into participatory planning is, I think, going to be an important thing in Tanzania, and just maybe in general. So that's something that's going on. I don't have funding for that yet, unfortunately. I just found out yesterday that we're looking for some funding, and we've got sort of a deferred. We're going to go after it next year, I guess, instead of this year. Another project that I'm interested in that same area is looking at the interface of indigenous languages and biological diversity in the area, in the part of Tanzania that has the most indigenous languages and the most biological diversity, which happens to be in the mountain range where we work. At least we work in a small portion of it, but there's an area called the Eastern Arc Mountains that stretch from Kenya down into southern Tanzania. So I'm hoping to be able to get some funding to work there as well. All of these things require certain sorts of skill sets, and some of those aren't necessarily what one finds among landscape architecture students, even graduate students. But the planning thing in particular actually would be something that would maybe have a good graduate student fit, in the sense that what we'll be doing is looking at planning options and potentially potential renderings of those, or renderings of those potential planning options rather, that will then integrate into virtual reality sort of scenarios, so people can basically put the headsets on and see what these places would look like, as opposed to looking at them through some sort of an analytical map or an analytical presentation. So I guess those are a couple things, I guess, that might work out. And it's, a lot of this depends on funding. I started out working in a consulting firm, and I wasn't particularly keen on working in the consulting. Well, I had a brief sort of a postdoc thing, but I wasn't really happy with that. So I kind of, I left that, and I ended up working in a consulting firm on topics, as I mentioned, that I wasn't particularly interested in, but I did as good a job as I could, and I paid attention a lot, and I learned a lot in that. So that's been a long time ago. I was doing environmental impact analysis and that sort of thing. But I transitioned from a consulting firm to a national laboratory, where I continued to work on that sort of thing. And the lab work was a couple steps though still not particularly interesting, because once you've done one of these things, you've done a lot of them in many ways. You just sort of apply the same general ideas and the same general approach in different places. But you can always learn sort of how things work, and kind of file away a lot of these things for future use. So now I don't really work on impact analysis per se, and yet I use those ideas and those concepts all the time. And so I guess what I would say is that you may not get your dream job straight out of the box, but keep active, keep publishing, or keep working on things that are in the area that you want to do, and pay attention to the other stuff that may not necessarily be related to what you want to do, because it could come back and pay big dividends in the end.